We've been looking at engineering economics, and we started with a kind of general intro, and then we moved into a description of cash flow using cash flow diagrams. Now we're getting into kind of a philosophical discussion of the time value of money and why a dollar in the future, if we take its present value, it might be less than an actual dollar today. So let's get into that a little bit and see if we can come up with kind of a discussion that we can all kind of generally agree with. All right, so the question that we're getting at is $1 in the future worth less than $1 today? And this is not really anything about inflation. This is really talking about, let's take that out of the picture. Just think of a dollar as if there was no inflation. So the first thing you might think of is, let's say you have a friend and they want to borrow a dollar and they're going to pay you back tomorrow. And these are a good, honest friend, and you have no doubts that they're going to pay you back tomorrow. In that case, a dollar today, a dollar tomorrow, probably it's not really of any great consequence. But imagine that your friend comes to you and says they want $10,000 and they'll pay you back in 30 years. Well, obviously, there's future benefits. Those future, whether they're going to be able to pay you in 30 years, there's risk involved. So those future benefits, the costs, are just a promise. They're not an actual thing that you can reasonably count on. Even if it's a good friend of yours, 30 years they may not be here with us anymore, or maybe they won't have money in 30 years to give it back to you. So there's risk involved. So a dollar today is not necessarily the same as a promise of that dollar later. But let's take away that sort of risk issue and think about a case of the fact that you might take your money and you could have bought a house, or you could have invested that dollar in a business and either collect rent over that period on the house, or you see in this bottom one here where you may take that dollar and invest it, and you may take that $1 invested in some business that's worth $10 in 30 years. So then that would be obvious to you that a dollar in the future is not the same as the dollar today, because the dollar essentially it's dollars kind of like stored power, and you can use that power to make more money. And if you're giving someone else that money for the 30 years, then you lose that opportunity. And that comes to our last discussion, which is that it's really compensation when for lost opportunities. And I'm really talking about here the fact that we can collect necessarily interest, for example, on our money. We can not invest in a kind of risky business, but we can actually just put our money in the bank. And so the increased value of the dollar really accounts for the fact that you're giving up on lost opportunities that you could have used that dollar to take advantage of. All right, so in general, when you talk about the time value of money, you need to discount future cash flow before comparing alternatives. So we're getting really into this concept of engineering economics, and that we need to figure out what really is that future cash flow, some future benefit, future costs, and what is it when we're going to compare that to costs, like an initial cost in year zero. We need to have them somehow on an equal footing. So we're comparing apples and apples. And we do that by discounting the future cash flow. And we're actually going to talk more the logistics of how you do that in the next lecture. But just keep that in mind. So we have the concept is of discounting future cash flow. What we end up doing is we take all our future cash flows and we put them in, we calculate the present value of those cash flows. So in other words, what is the value in the present of something that's going to happen in the future? When you look at the time value of money and what is the consequence is to the types of projects that it favors, it's going to favor projects with early revenue and or later costs. It's really good for us. When I say us who are presently alive on this earth at the present time, because we're going to really discount future benefits. So, like, it's not only revenue, but there may be sort of intangible benefits in the future are going to be discounted. So, on the second side here, and this is just the complement of the first, which is that it reduces consideration of future harm or expenditures, or even reduces consideration really of future benefits that today's expenditures might be able to induce or cause to occur. So, and one of the things that people are wrestling with today is spending money today to mitigate climate change impacts that might not occur for 20, 30, 40 years. And when you do an economic analysis, engineering economic analysis, those benefits in the future, when they're brought back to present value, they're diminished relative to their overall value to society because we're doing that discounting that we talked about. So it tends to favor things that are going to benefit us in the short term versus kind of the long term good for society. All right, so the next set of lectures is going to relate to how do we go about calculating the present value of future benefits or costs.